His name was Jedediah Sims, a trapper, a mountain man, the kind of man who could track a bobcat through fog or sleep through a blizzard with his back to a pine. He wasn't made for parlors or politics. He was made for grit, for cold mornings, for silence. He lived off the land, off instinct, off the raw edge of willpower. He didn't ask for anything. Took what he needed, left the rest for the crows. And in July of 1832, that kind of man was the only kind still breathing in Pierre's hole. The air hung heavy, thick with smoke. It tasted like scorched pine and gunpowder. The sky above that wide valley curled with gray ribbons, and the sun, high and hot, stared down like a judge at the gallows. Below, the earth was soaked with blood. Men lay scattered like broken dolls. Some were trappers, some were warriors. All of them were still now. This was supposed to be a celebration, the annual rendezvous. A few weeks where the mountains turned into a wild city. Whiskey flowed. Furs changed hands. Tall tales stretched taller. Laughter. Gunshots fired in jest. Men who hadn't spoken to another soul in 6 months sat around fires telling lies about bears and women. But that year, something cracked. The celebration turned into something else. Jedediah lay flat behind a fallen cottonwood tree. Bark was blown apart where bullets had slammed into it just minutes earlier. His Hawken rifle was in his hands, the stock warm, the barrel too hot to touch. He had fired every shot he carried. No powder left, no balls, nothing. His knife was all he had. 12 inches of sharp steel and an arm that still worked. Around him, the battle didn't stop. It screamed. Gunfire from flintlocks and muskets rattled like hail on tin. Arrows sliced through the smoke. Men screamed in English, in Nez Perce, in Flathead. Somewhere, a horse shrieked as it went down hard. The gros ventre were dug in across the meadow. A wall of logs, brush, and broken wagons. Even the bodies of their own dead horses stacked high. Behind it, they fought like wolves. Outnumbered but unshaken. They didn't break. They didn't run. Jedediah had come to Pierre's hole to trade. He'd trapped for a year in the Rockies. Over 100 pelts, brown gold, hard-earned. Everyone skinned, stretched, dried, and packed by his own hands. He had dreams, land out in Oregon country, maybe a cabin, a dog, a wife if the world was kind. But dreams don't mean much when the fire comes. His pelts burned to ash in the chaos. The Gros Ventre camp caught fire early. Maybe it was stray gunfire. Maybe it was on purpose. Jedediah never found out. Didn't matter. The smoke took everything. His friends, John and Abe, were already dead. He'd seen them near the river, sprawled in the mud, arrows in their backs, their scalps taken, their blood staining the stones. Jedediah was the last one left from their camp, trapped in the bloodiest rendezvous the frontier had ever seen. He wasn't thinking about Oregon now. He was thinking about surviving the next minute. This story, his story, wasn't carved into stone, wasn't studied in schoolhouses or printed in newspapers. But for those who were there, those who lived through it, those who didn't, it was everything. If you wanted to know why the valley turned red, you had to understand what brought these men together in the first place. Beaver. The beaver trade was gold in another form. Not coin, but fur. In the cities of the East and across Europe, men wore beaver hats like crowns. Top hats made of pressed beaver felt were the mark of wealth and class. That hunger reached across the Atlantic and bled into the wilderness. The Hudson's Bay Company, British, massive, cold, efficient. Then there was the American Fur Company, run by John Jacob Astor, the richest man in the country. He didn't climb mountains. He sent men to do it for him. And those men, they weren't soft. They were trappers. They moved alone. slept light, trusted few, fought hard. And they came from everywhere. The rendezvous brought them together. It was William Henry Ashley's idea. Instead of making the men haul pelts back to St. Louis, he brought the goods to them. Every summer, wagons full of powder, whiskey, lead, tobacco, and traps made the trek into the mountains. The trappers came down from the snow line. The tribes joined them, Nez Perce, Flathead, sometimes Crow. It was wild, chaotic, glorious. For a few weeks, the wilderness became a carnival. Pierre's Hole was one of the favorite spots, a wide, green valley tucked beneath the Tetons. Good grazing, good water, history thick in the soil. It was named after Pierre Tivanidagon, a trader who died here years before. The 1832 rendezvous was the biggest anyone had seen, over 400 trappers, plus families, plus warriors. Nez Perce and Flathead came strong. Horses ran in every direction. Children chased dogs. Tents went up like a canvas city. But not everyone came to trade. The Gros Ventre didn't pitch tents in the meadow. They stayed in the hills. They came heavy, with warriors, with families, with everything they owned. They watched. No smiles, no fires, just eyes. They weren't welcome. Too many old grudges, too many wounds. They had their own story, and it didn't end in peace. Jedediah had spotted one on a ridge just after sunrise. Painted face, long rifle. Watching, then gone. The others saw them too. Men who'd spent enough winters out west could feel it. The tension, the stillness in the wind, the silence before the scream. The rendezvous had become a powder keg. Men whispered around the fire that something was off. Dogs barked at shadows. Mules refused to drink. Nobody said it aloud. But the valley knew. The trap was already set, and something was about to strike the match. It started the way most frontier bloodlettings do. No fanfare, no warning, and due to a misunderstanding. Just heat, bitterness, and the weight of old bones. July 18th, 1832. Antoine Gaudin was a man carrying a grudge like a powder keg, with the fuse already lit. His father, long ago murdered by the Grove, had left a wound that didn't heal. It festered. And that morning, it found its moment. Gaudin and his party of trappers and Flathead allies were breaking from the rendezvous, heading out under a rising sun that promised nothing but sweat and dust. They weren't looking for trouble, but it came anyway. The Grove were nearby. Warriors, yes, but also women, children, elders, a whole band of people moving slow and quiet, not seeking a fight. One chief rode forward, peace pipe in hand, a gesture older than the mountains. It meant something in these parts. It meant, we talk. It meant there's still a chance. Gaudin didn't see the pipe, didn't see a man. All he saw was a target, a reminder, an opportunity. He gave the nod, and a Flathead warrior raised his rifle. One shot. The chief dropped. Pipe shattered. The fuse reached the powder, and the valley exploded. The Grove howled, rage and fire behind their eyes. Gaudin and his party turned heel and ran, dust flying, heart pounding. The Grove gave chase, into the heart of the valley, into the heart of the rendezvous. Gunshots split the summer air. At camp, whiskey was dropped for rifles. Dice clattered to the ground. Dreams scattered like leaves in the wind. The celebration turned to chaos. Veterans like William and Milton Sublette barked orders through the din. They moved like men who danced with death before, knew the rhythm, knew how to lead. The Sublettes had seen enough to know this wasn't going to be a skirmish. It was going to be a siege. Allies came running, Nez Perce, Flathead, seasoned warriors with old scores to settle. They stood side by side with the trappers. Over 800 men gathered in defense. outnumbering the Grove, but not outmatching their fury. The Grove knew they couldn't win a straight fight, so they fell back into a cottonwood thicket, swampy, tangled, nature's barricade. They fortified it, logs, brush, and their fallen horses. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't strong, but it was desperate. And sometimes desperation can hold back the sea. The attackers charged, first wave, then another. Each time they were pushed back. The Grove fought like the wounded do, without mercy, without fear. The air cracked with gunfire. Arrows sang through the trees. Smoke curled up and choked the sun. The ground was slick with blood. The leaves shuddered with every volley, and men died by inches. Jedediah Sims was there, in the mud, in the noise, in the madness. He tried to flank the fort with a group of trappers. It was a death march. They were pinned under a storm of musket balls and arrows. Men dropped, screamed, bled. Jedediah fired until his rifle cooked in his hands. Then he dropped it and unsheathed his knife. That was all he had left. That knife gleamed like a promise, short, brutal, final. The trees whispered prayers only the dying could hear. Blood seeped into the roots. The cries of wounded men joined the war whoops in a chorus that echoed from cliff to cliff. The Grove warriors had no illusions of victory, but they knew how to hold a line. They knew how to make their enemies bleed. Hours dragged. The heat baked blood into the dirt. The trappers were getting nowhere. Their numbers didn't matter in that swamp. So they turned to the one weapon that always got results: fire. They gathered brush, dry as bone, set it aflame under a volley of cover fire. The wind did the rest. The fort ignited. Flames climbed high. And then the sound started. Screams. Not just warriors, women, children. The fort was a tomb now, and the fire didn't care who it took. Those cries stayed with the men who heard them, followed them into sleep, haunted them in silence. Even the victorious covered their ears. Even the battle-hardened turned away. When the sun dipped low, the valley was still. The trappers retreated to camp, bloodied, hollow. Sure, they'd won. But the Grove weren't done yet. Under darkness, they slipped away into the mountains, scarred, silent, but alive. They left behind scorched earth, burnt bodies, and a silence that felt louder than the war cries had. Morning came. Smoke hung heavy. Ash drifted on the breeze. The Grove fort was gone. Just a blackened smear across the land. The valley stank of death. The price had been steep. 5 trappers dead, 7 native allies. The Grove lost more, maybe 26, maybe more than 50. Burned, buried, erased. Pierre's hole wasn't a market anymore. It was a graveyard. The rendezvous had turned from festival to funeral pyre. Jedediah walked among the ruins. His boots found bodies, bloated, blackened. Flies thick in the air. He found John and Abe by the river. Arrows in their backs, scalped. Their faces twisted in something close to surprise. He knelt beside them, but felt nothing. The furnace of battle had burned the last of his tears. His furs were gone, a whole year's worth. Prime beaver pelts, enough to buy land, start a life, gone in smoke. His horse? Gone. His gear? Gone. No traps, no food, no rifle rounds, just a knife, the clothes on his back, and the memory of fire. The others were packing, leaving, loading what they had onto mules and turning east. Back to St. Louis, back to civilization. Jedediah didn't move. He had nothing to carry, nothing to sell, nothing to go back to. He had a choice. Die here, or walk. He turned west, toward Oregon, toward maybe something better, maybe nothing at all. But at least it was forward. At least it was movement. The Snake River would be his compass now, winding like fate through the wilderness. The valley of Pierre's Hole faded behind him. July 1832. He didn't look back. There was nothing back there but ghosts, just ghosts, and the firelight etched into memory. He followed the Snake River's edge, his boots silent on scorched earth. Every step was a farewell, every mile a reckoning, every echo behind him a warning, every sunrise ahead a dare. They say a man don't know what he's made of till he's lost everything. Jedediah Sims found that out the day he turned his back on Pierre's Hole and walked into the void. July 20th, 1832, a day scorched into his bones. He didn't look back, didn't need to. Behind him was a valley of corpses and smoke. Ahead of him, 1,000 miles of wilderness, hunger, and the thinnest thread of hope. The Snake River became his only companion, twisting west like a vein of silver through scorched land. He followed it, step by grueling step, eyes fixed on the sunset like it owed him something. The first few days broke him open. He ate crickets, chewed pine bark. Hunger didn't knock, it kicked down the door. He was skin draped over bone, a scarecrow draped in buckskin. But he moved, always moved, because to stop was to die. On the 7th day, Providence, or perhaps Death's sloppy twin, left him a gift. A deer, freshly gutted by a mountain lion. The cat had taken its fill. Jedediah tore into the rest like a beast, knife in hand, face in flesh, blood on his chin, strength in his belly. He dried the strips of meat on sun-hot rocks, jerky for the road ahead. Each bite was a reminder he wasn't dead yet, that he was still in the game, still holding the line between man and memory. But food wasn't enough. Not out here. He needed a weapon. His rifle, useless without powder. His knife, intimate, too close for comfort. So he set about making a bow. He remembered the Shoshone and their quiet craftsmanship. No Osage orange to be found, but a juniper sapling would have to serve. For 3 days, he carved, shaved, and prayed it wouldn't snap. He twisted sinew from deer guts for string, whittled arrows from willow, flint for tips, hawk feathers for fletching. The hawk, a roadside casualty, gifted its wings to his cause. The bow was crude, but it sang. When he strung it, it felt like reclaiming power, clawing back just a sliver of control in a world that had gone mad. At first, the arrows flopped like wounded birds, but Jedediah was patient. The kind of patience you earn from winters spent watching beaver dams. He practiced daily. 20 yards, 30, 50. Slow progress, but progress. He was no Indian warrior, but he was good enough. Good enough to kill. Good enough to survive. The land ahead was vast. Endless. He crossed the mountain ranges like ghosts rising from the earth, waded through rivers that bit like snakes. Not a single white man for months. Just sky, wind, and the quiet murmur of his own voice echoing off canyon walls. He talked to himself, sang old trail songs, recited stories from a past life. He was the last actor on a stage no one watched. Sometimes he laughed. Sometimes he cried. Mostly, he walked. And he remembered. Ghosts followed him, friends with arrows in their backs, flames crackling in the thicket, children screaming in smoke. They visited in dreams and lingered in the hush between heartbeats. But the land offered moments of mercy. A Shoshone band shared meat and water. A Ute family traded him new moccasins. Not all Indians were his enemies. Some gave without asking. Others watched from afar. A Blackfeet hunting party passed nearby once, faces painted, horses silent. Jedediah curled in a rock crevice and held his breath till the danger passed. He lived on the knife's edge. He learned things, little tricks of survival that made the difference between a grave and a story. He watched bird movement to find water, listened to wind patterns in canyons, learned which mushrooms could kill a man and which could keep him upright another day. He began to understand the rhythm of the wild. Its silence was a language, its patterns a kind of gospel. And slowly, something changed. He stopped seeing himself as an outsider passing through. He started seeing himself as part of it, as if the wilderness had adopted him, begrudgingly, like a wolf raising a strange pup. In the spring of 1833, after 9 months of walking, Jedediah reached the Oregon country. The green spread before him like salvation. He'd survived a winter armed with only a knife and a homemade bow. Disease hadn't taken him. Starvation hadn't claimed him. He hadn't become bones in some nameless gulch. He'd made it. He built a cabin on the Willamette River, a modest place of pine and sweat, planted corn, squash, set traps more out of habit than hunger. The fire inside him had cooled. He didn't need to chase anymore. He didn't need to prove anything. The ghosts of Pierre's hole still lived with him, but they didn't speak so loud. And for the first time in years, the nights were quiet. Not empty, but peaceful. He lived alone for years. Locals called him the Hermit of the Willamette, strange but kind, quiet but solid. And then one fall, in 1842, a widow named Sarah crossed his path. 2 young children clung to her skirts. Her eyes held sorrow, but they also held strength. She saw past his silence, past the haunted stairs. She married him that October. The man who walked out of death had finally found life. But Jedediah's story wasn't just about blood and endurance. It was a mirror held up to America. The Battle of Pierre's Hole, so forgotten in the annals, was a wound in the hide of westward expansion. The fur trade wasn't adventure, it was industry, ruthless, extractive. It drove men into mountains for pelts, so some dandy back east could wear a beaver hat. It wiped out ecosystems, it gutted native ways of life. It paid in whiskey, debt, and grave markers. 2 giants ruled that trade. The British Hudson's Bay Company and the American Fur Company. They fed armies of trappers and watched them die from safe ledgers in far-off cities. Jedediah had been one of those men. He wasn't a hero. He was a cog, but he broke free. And that counts for something. Pierre's Hole wasn't just a massacre. It was a microcosm. Rivalries, betrayals, makeshift alliances. Trappers stood shoulder to shoulder with Nez Perce and Flathead warriors. Fought against the Gros Ventre. Some found enemies in men who looked like them. Some found brothers in those who didn't. The lines were never clean. The history of the West was never black and white. It was blood and mud and whatever could be carried on your back. Jedediah's tale is one of survival, of being scraped raw and still standing, of staring into the abyss and walking through it. In an age where we press buttons to live, it's easy to forget what it takes to survive when all you've got is a knife, some sinew, and sheer cussedness. He stripped life to its marrow, and he made it out. He reminds us, comfort is a gift, not a right. And when it all burns down, when the valley fills with smoke, and the world forgets your name, can you still walk? Jedediah did, and that's why his story matters. He found his way out of hell and into something quieter. Jedediah Sims built himself a cabin, just wood, sweat, and solitude, on the banks of the Willamette River. The kind of place where a man could forget the sound of gunfire and remember what corn sounds like growing in the wind. He dug up the earth with his own 2 hands, planted corn, squash. Maybe not much, but it was honest. He's still trapped, sure, but the frenzy was gone. The fire inside him had been doused at Pierre's Hole. Some ghosts don't scream. They just sit with you in the dark. The beaver were still out there, and he knew how to find them. But he didn't chase them the way he used to. The trapping became less about the gold and more about the rhythm, the quiet, the familiarity of old habits. The ghosts of Pierre's hole had carved something deep inside him. They weren't just memories. They were voices, shadows, and they stayed with him. He was a man changed, a man hollowed out and hammered back into shape. Folks came to call him the Hermit of the Willamette. He didn't argue, he didn't speak much at all, just lived, breathed, existed. Time moved on without asking his permission. Seasons passed like old friends walking by. Until 1842. That fall, he met her, Sarah, a widow with 2 kids and a quiet strength that could stop a flood. She saw in Jedediah the weariness of a man who'd danced too long with death. But she also saw the steel beneath the scars. And somehow, in that unlikely space, they built something. Married in the autumn. Jedediah Sims, survivor of the bloodiest rendezvous in frontier memory, finally found himself a family, a reason to stay, a reason to speak again. The children didn't care about his silence. They saw only a man who could build fires with his hands and tell stories with his eyes. But this ain't just one man's tale. The ghosts of Pierre's hole whisper louder than ever. That place, its smoke, its screams, still ripple through time. You want to understand the West? You want to understand America? You start right there. Because the story of Jedediah Sims and the Battle of Pierre's Hole ain't just some dusty footnote. It's a mirror. And what it shows us ain't always pretty. The fur trade wasn't just wilderness romance. It was a ruthless, grinding engine. The first gold rush, but brown and furry. Beaver hats were all the rage in Europe. Soft, sleek status symbols. That thirst drained rivers and sparked wars. It tore up tribes, shredded treaties, and piled up bodies. No one asked the beaver's opinion. Or the Nez Perces, or the Flatheads. Big names ran the show. The Hudson's Bay Company, the American Fur Company, titans playing chess with mountains and blood. Trappers like Jedediah were the pawns, grizzled, hardy, and dispensable. Every pelt was a paycheck. Every trade, a gamble. And the rendezvous? That was payday. That was Mardi Gras with gunpowder. Pierre's Hole, 1832. A valley swelling with life and menace. 400 trappers and then some, spilling in from every trail. Rocky Mountain Fur Company men. American Fur Company men. And the lone wolves. Like Jedediah. They came with furs and left with whiskey, bullets, and stories. For a few weeks, that valley was its own wild city. Tipis of the Nez Perce and Flathead tribes dotted the grass, horses stamped. Laughter echoed, cards shuffled, whiskey spilled, voices rose in song and brawls alike. It was a festival of trade, a celebration of survival. For just a moment, men forgot what the wilderness could do to them. But every celebration casts a shadow, and this one had a name, the Gros Ventre, a fierce tribe from the north, led by Chief Bio. Their scouts circled the hills, watching, waiting. No one said it, but everyone felt it. The air itself seemed to tighten like a noose. It just needed a spark. And that spark had a name, too. Antoine Godin, July 18th. Godin led a small party out of the valley. His heart was full of hate. His father, a trapper, had been slain by the grove. Vengeance had been simmering in him for years. So when his men spotted the grove caravan, a peaceful line of warriors, women, and children, his blood turned to fire. A grove chief rode forward with a peace pipe. He came to talk, to parley, to stop the blood before it spilled. But Godin saw only a target. He stepped forward with a Flathead warrior at his side. He spoke soft words in the Blackfoot tongue. lured the chief in, then gave the signal. A crack rang out. The chief fell. The pipe shattered in the dust, and the valley caught fire. War cries cut through the air. Grove warriors surged. Godin's men fled for the main camp, but the damage was done. The spark had caught, and the powder keg exploded. Trappers scrambled. Some were too drunk to hold their rifles. Chaos reigned. The wilderness city turned into a battlefield. Jedediah grabbed his knife. His eyes went cold. He'd seen hell once before. Now it was back, and it was hungry. The sounds of celebration were gone, swallowed by gunshots and screams. Allies became warriors. The valley became a trap. And the man who had come to trade now had to fight just to live. Again. They didn't have time to think, just instinct. They grabbed their rifles, hit the dirt, and took cover behind wagons and trees. William Sublett, tough as rawhide and twice as stubborn, was the kind of man who didn't rattle easy. In the middle of all that gunfire and panic, he stood like a rock in a river. He barked orders, steady and sharp. The men listened. They lined up, braced themselves, and returned fire like a wall of iron. But the Grove Entra? They weren't folding. They might have been outnumbered, but they were fighting with something deeper than numbers. Honor, blood, the kind of rage that comes when your home and your kin are on the line. They pulled back into a patch of willows and cottonwoods, thick enough to hide a dozen men to every square foot. A natural fortress, and they knew how to work it. They dug in like badgers, used whatever they had, logs, brush, even the carcasses of their own horses. That thicket turned into a barricade of desperation. The trappers charged again and again, yelling, cursing, blazing lead. And every time they were pushed back by a fire that cut like a razor. Grove Ventre fire wasn't just hot. It was accurate. Men fell hard, some with screams, some with silence. The knee-spur and flathead warriors joined in, bringing their own fury. They swarmed with arrows and war clubs, hitting that fortress like a living storm. Jedediah Sims was right in the thick of it, soaked in sweat, gunpowder, and adrenaline. He fought like a man possessed. Grief, fury, survival all tangled up. He saw his friends go down. He locked eyes with Grove warriors, eyes full of the same fear, the same rage. These weren't monsters. These were men, just like him. But there wasn't time for sympathy. Not out there, not in that kind of hell. It was kill or be killed. The sun was relentless, baking the blood into the ground. Hours passed. Desperation set in. And then someone made the call. Fire. They'd burn the bastards out. It wasn't brave, and it sure as hell wasn't noble, but it was the only option left. They lit dry brush, hurled torches into the thicket. Flames shot up like the gates of hell had cracked open. Screams, high and piercing, tore through the smoke. Women, children. It was horror made real. Night finally fell. Guns went quiet. The men waited, staring into the smoke, into the black. They figured it was done. But the Grove Vandra? They weren't beaten. Not yet. In the dark, they slipped out, ghosts with flesh, carrying their wounded, leaving their dead. Morning came with a hush. The smoke hung low like sorrow itself. When the trappers walked into what was left of that thicket, they found hell's handiwork. Burned corpses, stench of scorched flesh, death. Victory had never tasted so bitter. 5 trappers dead, 6 more wounded. Even Sublett had taken a hit. 7 allied warriors lost. And the Grove? At least 26 confirmed dead. Maybe more, swallowed by the fire or gone to die in the hills. Jedediah walked through it all like a man underwater. He was alive, but not whole. Something had burned away in that valley. His belief in glory, in adventure, in the old romance of the frontier. All he could see now was blood, smoke, and waste. The rendezvous was over. Survivors packed up. They left behind a place that would never stop whispering. But Jedediah? He stayed. Not in body, in soul. The ghost of Pierre's hole had tethered him to that soil. He was part of it now. A ghost walking the land. He left. No date, no farewell. Just put one foot in front of the other and headed west. Time didn't matter anymore. Sunrises, hunger, pain. That was the clock he lived by now. Water was first. His throat was leather. He found a dry creek bed, dug like a desperate dog. A trickle of muddy water greeted him. It tasted like dirt and life, then food. His stomach was a yawning cave. He had a knife and not much else. No rifle, no bullets, no traps, no beaver, just sagebrush and stone. The old-timers had stories, how they survived when stripped to the bone. Roots, bugs, snakes, Jedediah remembered. And he did the same. Dug up a fat white grub, ate it. Bitter. But food. He kept walking. Days passed. No game, no people. Just silence so loud it pressed down on him like the whole sky wanted to crush him. A dead hawk gave him meat and feathers. Tough, raw, barely edible. But it kept him on his feet. He saved the feathers. He'd need them. He needed fire. Nights were cold. Not the kind of cold that nipped at you, the kind that crawled into your bones and settled in. No flint, no steel. Had to go the old way. Fire drill, bough, spindle. He scavenged cottonwood and willow. Used his own buckskin shirt for a string. Fashioned it with shaky hands and stubborn will. Cut a notch in sandstone. Sawed back and forth, arms on fire, sweat in his eyes. But he didn't stop. Smoke, ember, flame, fire. He'd done it. Jedediah Sims had made fire. And in that moment, in that flickering glow, he wasn't just surviving. He was back. A man again. The trapper became the hunter. Not by choice, by necessity. With fire in his hands, he had warmth. He had light. He had the ancient gift that scared away beasts and brought raw meat to life. But fire alone wouldn't fill his belly. Grubs and dead birds might keep a man crawling, but they wouldn't keep him standing. Not for long. He needed meat, real meat. So he made a bow, crude. Barely more than a bent juniper sapling strung with willpower. It wouldn't win any wars, but it might win him one more day. He carved arrows, tipped them with flint shards, fletched them with hawk feathers from that sky-fallen meal. He practiced, every damn day, and he was bad at it, missed more than he hit. But the thing about Jedediah Sims was this. He didn't stop. First kill was a rabbit. Stalked it for hours. Got close enough to smell its fear. Let fly an arrow. Missed. The rabbit vanished like smoke. He cussed the sky. But he tried again, and again. Then one day the arrow found its mark. Caught the rabbit in the flank. It squealed, tried to bolt. Jedediah ran it down. Ended it with a knife. Blood on his hands. Pride in his chest. He'd made the bow. He'd made the arrow. He'd made the kill. That rabbit was more than food. It was proof. Proof that he was learning. He began to read the land like scripture. Tracks in the mud. Droppings in the brush. Water holes where deer came to drink. He wasn't just passing through the wilderness anymore. He was part of it. A shadow in the trees. A breath on the wind. A predator. His buckskins were rags. So he killed a deer. Skinned it slow. Scraped the hide clean with a stone. Tanned it using the deer's own brains. A foul, greasy job, but it worked. The hide came out soft. Pliable. He made a shirt. Leggings. Stitched it all with bone and sinew. No fashion award, but it kept out the cold. Danger was always close. A grizzly came roaring out of the brush one day. Jedediah scrambled up a pine tree, heart slamming in his chest. Sat there for hours while the bear circled below, then wandered off with a grunt. Another day, he almost stepped on a rattler, killed it with a rock, ate it that night. A flash flood hit like judgment, one moment dry, the next a roaring wall of water. It swept him away. He clung to a log, bounced like driftwood, came to rest on a muddy bank, bruised and breathless, but alive. He wasn't just surviving, he was changing. The chaos of battle had melted away the useless parts. The silence of the wild forged him into something tougher, meaner, better. He was becoming a man of the mountains, a thing of claw and callous. And then, hope. On the horizon. Mountains. The Blue Mountains of Oregon. He knew those ridges. Had heard the whispers of green valleys beyond. He was close. He could feel it in his bones. Crossing them wasn't easy. The snow came high. The wind cut deep. But he pushed forward, step after frozen step. Then valley, green, alive, the Willamette. He stared down at it like a man at heaven's gates. Paradise. He made his way down. His legs were sticks, his beard a tangled mess, his hair wild as the hills, his clothes stitched from death and dirt. And still he walked. He saw a cabin, smoke curling from the chimney, human life. He approached slow, careful. A man stepped out, rifle in hand, narrow eyes. "Who are you?" "My name's Jedediah Sims," he rasped, voice barely more than a breath. "I've come a long way." The man looked hard, then lowered the rifle. "You're welcome here, friend. Come on in. The wife's got stew on the fire." Jedediah stepped inside, and for the first time in a year, he was warm for more than just a night. The business of fur. Empires of greed. Folks think of mountain men as lone wolves, but behind every trap was a ledger. Behind every skin, a banker's smile. The Rocky Mountain fur trade wasn't adventure. It was economy. Men like William Henry Ashley didn't wear buckskins. They wore suits. Sat in St. Louis offices, dreaming up systems. Ashley birthed the Rendezvous, a brilliant web that brought the buyers to the sellers. It worked. Made him rich. But for the trappers, it was chains. Debt was the leash. Company credit bought their powder, their traps, their whiskey. By the time they paid their dues, they owed more. Forever in the red. And looming over it all, John Jacob Astor, America's richest man. He didn't bleed or freeze out there. He just made sure everyone else did. He crushed rivals, twisted arms in Washington, built the American Fur Company into a behemoth, a corporation before that word even had teeth. His British counterpart? The Hudson's Bay Company, older, meaner, a spiderweb stretching across Canada. They didn't fight with guns. They fought with trade posts, price wars, politics. The HBC and Astor's empire locked horns in the Pacific Northwest, a cold war made of pelts and promises. It wasn't about freedom. It wasn't about adventure. It was about control, about empire. And the tools of that empire? Iron and steel, traps and knives, rifles and greed. That was the world Jedediah Sims had walked away from. And it was the world still waiting, just beyond the cabin door. A trapper's life hung by a thread. And that thread was steel, his rifle, his knife, and most of all, his traps, tools of the trade, lifelines in iron. The Newhouse trap was king, born from the forge of Sewell. Newhouse, a blacksmith out of New York, it was a marvel of efficiency. Simple, brutal, dependable. 2 jaws, 1 spring, 1 snap. That was it, but that was enough. Enough to hold a struggling beaver, to crush bone, to end life quietly beneath the current. Setting one wasn't just labor. It was a ritual, a science, a bit of black art. You had to know where to look. Find the beaver lodge. Find the dam, the muddy mounds of sticks and instinct. Trace the channels, the secret paths they swam at dusk and dawn. Wade in. Icy water up to your waist. Numb fingers. Shaking knees. The kind of cold that makes you doubt you're even alive. You had to plant the trap just under the surface, out of sight, out of mind. Stake it with a chain, good and solid, to the creek bed. Bait it with castor, thick, oily, foul, the scent of sex and territory. A musk from the glands of the very creature you were hunting. That was the cruel genius of it. Beaver to catch beaver. Each trapper had his own blend, a secret mix, passed down or invented on the trail. It was their signature, their brand. Every morning you broke ice, sometimes with a hatchet, sometimes with your own fists. You hoped, you prayed, you reached down with a stick or your bare hands, feeling for the trap. Sometimes it was empty, sometimes it was sprung and gone, but sometimes you felt the weight of wet fur, cold, still, caught. Haul it up, water dripping, steam rising. You killed it if it wasn't dead already. Most times, they drowned fast. The pelt was what mattered. That was the currency of the mountains. That hide, once scraped, stretched, dried, became a plume. One plume could fetch $3, maybe $4. 10 pelts could feed a man a month. 100 could make him feel rich. But no one ever felt rich for long. Not out there. You'd skin it on the spot. The carcass was tossed or sometimes cooked, sometimes used to bait the next trap. The hide went on a willow hoop. Scrape it, dry it, store it, count it, guard it. Pelts were worth more than whiskey, more than bullets, more than gold to some men. But it came at a cost. Everything did. Frostbite, drowning, grizzlies in the dark, hostiles in the woods. You could die checking a trap. Plenty did. You could vanish, and no one would ever find your bones. It was a life for young men, for wild men, for men running from something or chasing something they couldn't name. Jedediah Sims had been all of those once, but not anymore. The wild had aged him. The battle had broken him. He tried to settle, to put down roots in soil instead of snow, built a life with Sarah, tried to be a husband, a father, but Pierre's hole was always with him, a scar in his soul. Sometimes he'd vanish for days, weeks, into the hills, into the trees. He never said why. He didn't have to. Sarah knew. Some wounds never close. They just quiet down. He always came back, tired, quieter, but he came back. He taught his sons the old ways. How to hunt, how to track, how to read a trail like scripture. But more than that, he taught them respect for the land, for the animals, for the balance. He'd seen what happened when greed ran wild. He'd lived it. He didn't want them to repeat those sins. The world was changing. Silk hats came in. Beaver went out. London and Paris dictated the death of a way of life. Fashion spared the beaver, but not the men who trapped them. The fur trade collapsed. Rendezvous turned into ghost towns. The last big one came in 1840. Quiet, hollow, like the echo of a great song that no one sang anymore. Jedediah watched it all with tired eyes. The mountain men were fading, replaced by farmers, ranchers, men with deeds instead of dreams. Towns rose, fences spread. The wilderness shrank. He wasn't angry, just sad, accepting. He'd lived free, lived wild. Now he lived slow, steady. The world he knew was gone, but he had made another, with calloused hands and hard-earned peace. Still, survival wasn't just muscle. It was mind. And the mind, well, the mind could be a cruel place. Out there alone, it turned inward. Jedediah fought that too. The silence, the emptiness. He made routines, woke with the sun, mapped his day, talked to himself, debated, recounted old memories, his mother's kitchen, his father's boots by the door, cornfields in Ohio, safe, warm, far away. But then came the others, the bad ones. Screams in the dark, flames, faces, Pierre's hole in his dreams. He'd wake with fists clenched, soaked in sweat. He didn't try to run from them anymore. He welcomed them. Let them come. Let them remind him who he was, what he'd survived. He learned to live with ghosts. That was the price. He had paid it. He had survived it. The end came quietly, not with a bang, but with a whisper. While he trapped and scraped and bled, the world changed its mind. In the parlors of London, in the salons of Paris, fashion turned. Silk hats became the rage, lighter, sleeker, cheaper, and just like that, the beaver was spared. But not because anyone cared, because silk was better. The fur trade, that great engine of exploration, of conquest, of survival, sputtered to a stop. The mountain men were finished. The free trappers became store clerks, scouts, guides, or they vanished. The rendezvous died. The last one, a funeral march in buckskin. Jedediah didn't go. He stayed home, in the valley, with Sarah, with his sons, with the peace he'd fought for. He didn't mourn the old ways. He carried them in him, like a fire, quiet, but never gone. The mountains were changing. The world was changing. And he had finally changed with it. They guided them. That's what became of some of the trappers, the old guard. Men like Bridger, men like Carson. They took their maps, drawn in blood and memory, and showed the settlers the way. The farmers, the miners, the dreamers, all chasing a west those old mountain men knew in their bones. They led wagon trains across rivers with no names and mountains with no mercy. Their stories were passed down around campfires, half truth, half legend. They knew where water flowed, where danger lurked, and when the job was done, they disappeared again, like smoke in a canyon breeze. But others, like Jedediah Sims, they vanished for good, slipped back into the trees like ghosts, built cabins in remote valleys where the sun came late and left early, raised smoke that no one saw. They weren't made for towns. They weren't made for talking. They were the last of a breed, men who couldn't be broken, couldn't be tamed. Legacy of blood and iron. That's what they left behind. The fur trade wasn't just trade. It was war by other means. It cracked the wilderness open. It cleared the way, but at a cost, a terrible cost. The trappers were the tip of the spear, the first faces to step into lands others had called home for centuries. They mapped the rivers, charted the trails. They didn't come for God or country. They came for gain, for adventure, for the wild freedom of a place with no rules. But they carried ruin in their packs, disease, whiskey, guns. Pierre's hole wasn't a one-off. It was part of a cycle, a pattern that would echo for 50 more years, until the tribes were boxed into reservations, until the buffalo were bones on the plains, until the wild ways were gone. You don't find that in school books, but it's there. In the ground, in the rivers, in the silence. This is the true cost of manifest destiny. Built not on empty land, but on bones, on beaver hides, on broken promises. Jedediah Sims was part of that. No use denying it. He was victim and executioner. The wilderness beat him, so he beat back. His story isn't heroic, it's human. A man, alone, doing what he had to do in a world that knew no mercy. A world that's gone now, but one that still has something to teach, if we're quiet enough to listen to the ghosts. He lived long, saw peace, saw change. Wagon trains, barbed wire, towns, civilization chewing away the forest, inch by inch. But Pierre's hole never left him. He locked it inside, told no one, not Sarah, not his sons. But sometimes, on winter nights, he'd stare into the fire, eyes distant, haunted. And Sarah, she'd place a hand on his shoulder. No words. She didn't need any. She knew. She'd always known. She married a man with ghosts. He died in 1878, in his sleep. An old man in a world he barely recognized. The world of the mountain man was gone, turned into myth, into pulp stories and dime novels. But for Jedediah Sims, it had been flesh and blood, real as frostbite, real as gunfire. No statue, no plaque, no pages in history books, just a name carried on the wind. But his story matters, because it's the price tag of progress. It's the human cost of westward expansion. It's not about heroes. It's about survival, about the darkness men walked through and somehow returned from. The scars were there, not just on his skin, but in his mind. We have words for it now. PTSD, trauma. But back then, it was just something man had to live with. And Jedediah did. The smell of smoke took him back to the fire. The burning fort. The screams. A twig snapping in the woods made his hand twitch, reaching for a knife that wasn't there. He never relaxed, never fully. His eyes were always scanning, listening for danger. He was a man who'd spent too long in war. The dreams were the worst. Same faces, same screams, same blood. He'd wake soaked in sweat, step outside into the cold night air, stare at the stars. The vastness calmed him, made him feel small again, in a good way. Nature gave him peace in the wind, the river, the birds, the silence. It didn't ask, it didn't judge, it just was. He could sit for hours watching a deer graze, watching the river roll by. That was his healing. Not talk, not medicine, just being, just breathing. He would tell his grandchildren how to track a rabbit, how to read the wind, how to build a fire from wet wood. But he never spoke of battle, never spoke of blood. He left those pages unturned. And the kids? Maybe they sensed that. Maybe they knew not to ask. His story reminds us, some wounds don't bleed. Some scars don't show. But they're there, deep, heavy, ghosts that don't rattle chains, just memories. And his story's not done. Not really. Because it echoes in every soldier who comes back from war, in every refugee who flees fire and blood, in every man or woman who walks through hell and carries it home. It's not a story of victory, not even a story of defeat. It's a story of endurance. A man versus the wilderness, and the wilderness inside him.